On January 14th, 1963, George Wallace is inaugurated as governor of Alabama, one of the most complicated and controversial politicians in American history. He first ran for governor in 1958. He was actually endorsed by the NAACP in that election. He lost. Wallace ran again in 1962, this time as a segregationist. It was a landslide victory. At his inauguration in 1963, he gave a now famous speech which included the words, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever." In 1963, he stood in front of Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama in a futile attempt to block the integration of the school by black students Vivian Malone and James Hood. He continued his efforts to stand in the schoolhouse door later that year by attempting to block black students from enrolling at 4 separate elementary schools in Huntsville. Wallace's opposition to integration led him to announce that he would challenge fellow Democrat President John F. Kennedy in the 1964 presidential primary. Wallace made this declaration in Dallas, just days before Kennedy's assassination in that same city. In 1965, Wallace sent state troopers to Selma to block attempts to march to the state capitol in Montgomery. This resulted in the infamous Bloody Sunday incident at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. At the time, under Alabama law, governors could serve an unlimited number of terms, but could not serve consecutive terms. So, in 1966, his wife Lurleen Wallace ran as what many considered a proxy candidate for governor. She won the election, becoming the state's first female governor, but died of cancer in May 1968, and was replaced by Lieutenant Governor Albert Brewer. In 1968, Wallace ran for president as a third-party candidate with the American Independent Party. This campaign for president occurred amid his wife's battle with cancer. He got on the ballot in all 50 states, with a platform promoting law and order, states' rights, and racial segregation. His running mate was Curtis LeMay, the retired U.S. Air Force general who implemented the effective yet controversial strategic bombing campaign in the Pacific theater of World War II, which included the firebombing of Tokyo and other Japanese cities. LeMay served as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1961 to 1965 under U.S. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. With LeMay as his vice presidential candidate, Wallace won 5 states and 46 electoral votes, making him the most recent third-party candidate to carry a state in a presidential election. Wallace was elected Alabama's governor for a second term in 1970, and in 1972 he ran again for president, this time as a Democratic primary candidate. At a campaign rally in Maryland, Wallace was shot 4 times by 21-year-old busboy Arthur Bremer. Wallace survived, but was paralyzed from the waist down. He ultimately lost that campaign for the Democratic nomination, finishing second in the delegate count. Wallace was re-elected governor of Alabama in 1974 and made another failed attempt at the presidency in 1976. It was during the 1970s, after his near-death experience, that Wallace began contacting civil rights leaders to ask forgiveness for his past actions. In 1979, Wallace said of his stand at the schoolhouse door, quote, "I was wrong. Those days are over, and they ought to be over," end quote. In 1982, he was elected Alabama's governor once again, but this time with black support. During that 4th and final term in office, Wallace appointed more blacks to state positions than any other Alabama governor. This included 2 members of his cabinet. Governor Wallace met with civil rights leaders in Selma on the 20th anniversary of the 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery. Wallace also met with both Vivian Malone and James Hood, the students he had attempted to block from the University of Alabama decades earlier. Wallace apologized personally to each of them and said that during the civil rights movement, Malone, quote, conducted herself with grace, strength, and above all, courage, end quote. Hood stated that he believed in the sincerity of Wallace's apologies, and said that Wallace was haunted by people's lack of forgiveness for his actions. George Wallace died in 1998. James Hood attended his funeral. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 1741, infamous American Revolutionary War traitor Benedict Arnold is born in Norwich, Connecticut. In 1784, the Continental Congress ratifies the 1783 Treaty of Paris that officially ends the Revolutionary War. In 1900, Giacomo Puccini's Tosca makes its world premiere at the Teatro Costanzi in Rome. In 1954, Hollywood icon Marilyn Monroe marries baseball superstar Joe DiMaggio in San Francisco. In 1973, the Dolphins win Super Bowl VII, becoming the only team to finish an NFL season undefeated. Also in 1973, Elvis's Aloha from Hawaii special becomes the first solo concert broadcast live via satellite. In 2020, Australia's extreme wildfires force a suspension of practice sessions for the Australian Open. And now, it's time for our Today in History quiz. Where was civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. born? Montgomery, Alabama? Memphis, Tennessee? Atlanta, Georgia? Or Jackson, Mississippi? Think you know the answer? Drop your guesses in the comments below. Find out if you're right tomorrow on Today in History.